Hey everyone, you're tuning into Startups Unedited. I'm your host, Justin Dorfman, and today I'm joined by the co-founders of Lucky, Sneh Parmar and Nafis Azad. Hey guys, thanks for joining me today.
Justin, how are you?
What's up,
Doing
Justin?
well.
Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. I was super excited to have you guys on the show. It's kind of unusual, to be honest, that we have two co-founders on the show. We usually are speaking to a founder or a salesperson or a marketing exec. So very excited for this episode and definitely want to dive into your relationship, how you guys met and the co-founder relationship specifically. But before we do that, for those that don't know much about Lucky, why don't you tell us a little bit about the company and what you guys do?
Yeah, happy to kick it off. Super high level. What Lucky is a omni-channel data platform. So we connect brands to their inventory sitting in retail stores, so they can use those products sitting on shelves to get that product to the customer faster when a customer buys directly from the brand. An example of that would be like, let's say you're looking at X toothpaste brand online. You're looking to buy it directly from the brand itself. The only method of getting it today is buying it from the brand and waiting a week to get it shipped from their warehouse because they don't have access to their inventory at retail stores. We go partner with all these major retailers out there, ingest their inventory data, and then share that back with the brand. So now when a customer is shopping, they're able to see within a certain geography all the stores near them with the exact product available, and they can use the retailer to buy online, pick up in store, or get it shipped from store same day. So it's a much faster and sustainable method of fulfillment for brands than they could do by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's super cool. And I know I've experienced that myself, buying stuff online and seeing how long I have to wait when, there's items in the store just down the street from me. So I can definitely understand the pain point, and it's awesome that you guys are solving for that. I'm curious about the founding story though. So how did you guys meet? And what made you decide to start a company together?
Yeah, no, I can touch on a little bit how we met and then hand the baton off there. But Sneh and I were both kind of at similar stages of our careers when we first met. So I was running a software design and development agency. I'd been running that company for like 5-6 years out of college. And Sneh was working on not only consulting for commerce, in the commerce industry, big retail, big brands like Coca-Cola, but also working on the software side, on the fun side, investing in accelerating machine learning companies and things like that. And so we kind of saw ourselves in a similar stage when we connected, actually in Atlanta. Sneh, born and raised there, and went to Georgia Tech, and I was working there with my last company. And when we had met, I feel like first, we really connected as friends, which I think is really integral to just our communication style and our relationship. But from a career perspective and just timing, it was really great because we had both had the opportunity to work on like a lot of different companies, a lot of other people's companies, and help those go to success. And I think we, first of all, had worked from companies from startup to large enterprise, and we really knew that startup was where our kind of brains were really moving, the gears were turning when we would work on startups. We saw that vision for us in that industry. And I think commerce is kind of like a shared passion, fascination for us. So from that friendship, we really trialed and errored a lot of different ideas together. And I think that we learned a lot about our kind of co-founding relationship early on, and went through what are the ups and downs of not only building companies together, but kind of learning each other's relationship together really early. And so I like to think that this was kind of our first success in building a venture, but it wasn't really our first time building something together. I think we kind of ironed a lot of the kinks out before Lucky really became Lucky. And I think that's to the benefit of the people we work with today. I think that they look at us as people that work very fluidly together. And there was a lot of, growth that me and Sneh had kind of experienced together before that.
Awesome. Well, you mentioned that you guys sort of tried building around other ideas before. I'm curious, for this specific idea with Lucky, how did you come up across the problem? And even more interestingly, I'd love to understand, how did you guys validate it? Like, what did you do to test the idea and validate that this is actually a problem that people have and would be willing to pay to solve? And finally, what were those signals, those insights that made you realize, there's something here and we should invest our time in really building something around this?
Yeah, I mean, I could take this one. I think super early on, I think like Nafis and I both are like founders who are D2C founders, right? So we would talk to them, learn more about just what their problems were. And one of the biggest challenges we saw was whenever they expanded into wholesale, so whenever they got the product into they had issues understanding what the sell-through rates were, how they can utilize that inventory, all that.
Where the
And then
inventory was.
to what we were talking about was really like we were buying a brand online. So like the real case study was like we were buying a toothpaste product online. We got into charcoal toothpaste for some random reason, don't ask why. We're buying it online, paid for shipping, waiting a week, and just ended up talking to a friend of mine on the West Coast about it. And I was like, hey, you should check out this like toothpaste brand that we use. And he's like, oh, I know those guys. We get from Target whenever we go. And I was like, oh, I didn't know you could get it at Target. It was like about a block away from me in New York City. And when I went there and saw it on the shelf, that's kind of when the light bulb moment went off for Nafis and I. We were like, wait, why is the product available locally to us when we're not able to, but we have to wait a week, even though it's coming from warehouse. Quickly did some diligence regarding brands and retailers and realized once a wholesale goes through, brands and retailers, they're really competing against each other for the same customer. They don't really collaborate outside of that whole wholesale PO process. And that's where we saw in a post-pandemic experience, an opportunity to create a more collaborative ecosystem. Because at the end of the day, the way people were buying has shifted. People wanted to buy from the brands online. But the biggest issue was we were seeing people drop off to go to Google or Amazon because it's a much more faster and a sustainable method of fulfillment. Whereas now with leveraging the retailer's data, a brand can have a customer buy online, but still get it same day via the retailer for pickup or delivery. And that was really unique. And the way we like initially validated this was Nafis was actually living in Los Angeles, and we had some small brands and some small retailers that we were working with, and he would basically go and drop off products at different small retail stores, and we would just see if those customers would go to the brand's website and if they were interested in getting that product locally to them. And the data points that we saw was really interesting. We saw a huge engagement rate with the tool, people wanting to get it same day from a retailer that was close to them, for whether it was for pickup or delivery. But the biggest issue we were seeing was a lot of these brands. I mean, if you're a brand, you're selling all across the US, if not the world. So you're getting engagement data from everywhere. And if we were only in a small portion of LA through the stores that we had set up, so we're like, wait, we're seeing a lot of engagement, but we have to start national. We can't start micro location because the density is just not there. So we ended up taking what we saw was most valuable about the platform at that time, the understanding that, hey, customers wanted to get the product from that brand locally, and then going to pitch major retailers, ones with the national distribution or national store coverage. And then we were fortunate enough to get one of those major retailers to agree to us and say, hey, that sounds great. And then it just took off from there, where we now had distribution where customers in most metropolitan cities could get the product locally. And then just went from there.
And a lot of that, kind of doing those unscalable things for the validation is I think such a key part of like getting an idea off the ground. And that pivot that we made from realizing, we're doing this unscalable thing. I'm literally driving around LA, which is like the biggest metro area in I don't know, like the country for sure. And I'm driving all around, dropping all this product off. That's the unscalable thing, right? And making the pivot to something scalable for us, I think was so much around velocity, right? Like the second that we realized that we were onto something with this micro idea and we could scale it to this national idea, I think the biggest thing that kind of led us for success there was extremely high velocity in both product and partnership conversations. So not just us shipping product at a really fast rate and making and kind of creating solutions around what the ideal product can be really quickly, which is a team effort, but us pushing behind that, it was a real big part of that. But then also really high velocity in partnership conversations, because I think early on when you're trying to establish something like what we were trying to establish in a scalable way, you need to have 100 conversations, and the ones that really, can generate a lot of depth for you, generating a lot of velocity around that. There's a skill set around that I think we really, we'd already developed and started building momentum around, but that's when it started really paying off for us. So I think that was kind of like the trigger point when we took something very unscalable, very MVP, gritty, hustle, idea oriented into a real business, and saw it start moving with momentum.
I love that story because I hear that a lot. You should try things that are unscalable before going for scale. And I've always been a little confused about that. You know, people say that and they don't give examples, but that's like a perfect example. You driving around LA delivering, you know, hand delivering these items is like a perfect example, and really brings that insight to life. One thing you said, Sneh, is you mentioned the pandemic, and I looked and I actually saw that you guys started the company, I think in 2020. So really in the midst of the pandemic. And some people may think, wow, that's a crazy thing to do. Like starting a company, starting a startup, and bringing something that's completely new to market is already crazy, but doing it in the midst of a pandemic is really, really crazy. I'm curious what made you guys decide that was the right time to start this company? And obviously, you know, I think we're returning a little bit more to normal life, but now there's the economic uncertainty. What's it been like throughout the life of Lucky building this company in one way or another, a very uncertain environment?
I think for us, it was, the way I look at it is that no matter what the market is doing, or whether it's a pandemic or the prolonged recession or whatever that everyone is assuming is going to happen, there's always winners and losers, right? And I think there was an opportunity that opened up during the pandemic that we took advantage of. And that was, all of these retailers during the pandemic had invested a lot of energy, resources, and dollars towards building strong inventory management systems and strong buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup solutions. And you saw, like, I mean, during the pandemic, like Target's curbside pickup went up like 500% year over year. And what we do in our platform, we take advantage of those systems that these retailers have built out. If we're not able to get accurate data from these retailers, then our system wouldn't work. And it was because of the pandemic that these major retailers invested in that. So timing wise, it made a lot of sense for us. It was very strategic. Also, it was the first time customers had to shift their method of buying, right? A lot of customers got used to buying online, but getting it from the store same day, or going to pick it up after they were online, so they don't have to like wait and walk around the store. And that behavior shift also added to how basically what we were building. We were building a tool using brands' e-commerce sites as the first touch point for customers, but then letting the customer buy however they want that was best suited for them and their preference. And I think the pandemic really enabled us to grow quickly because of that shift that occurred. And at the same time, brands and retailers during the pandemic realized they needed each other in order to continue growing and scaling. So I think a lot of things happened that was really advantageous for us, that we had the foresight to realize and then just take advantage of as we grow. So
yeah, and I think that is, I mean, that speaks a lot to the market tailwinds, right? That pushed us forward, and at every point kind of made us realize things are moving in a way where this technology was needed. And then I'd say from a team and founder perspective, right? Like I do think that, like Sneh said, in every market, there's winners and losers. And I think in every market, there's consistent entrepreneurs, right? And I think that is really a difference maker for us, where I don't think there was a point in our journey, whether it was the start of the pandemic when everything was shut down, or, you know, right now where we're entering into, you know, really uncertain economic times, and we don't know whether it's funding or customers or what all that kind of shifts as a result of the economy. I don't think there's a time where the question is, should we back out of this and should we not build this? I think the question is, all right, so what does this change? You know, what's the new rules that we need to consider so we can continue to be entrepreneurs and continue to build a business? So I do think there is you know, I think Sneh and I are both people that we're going to become entrepreneurs no matter what the environment around us was. And even if that's not necessarily true for everyone, I think that if your desire is to become an entrepreneur and step in to this world, like you kind of have to look at the environment as circumstances that you need to circumnavigate and not necessarily surrender to, or else, you know, there's really no way to succeed.
Yeah, that's a super powerful insight. And I think as you guys were talking, I'm thinking back to all these moments, you know, at least in my life, 2008 financial crisis, the pandemic, now the economic uncertainty. And actually you see a trend where some of the most innovative companies have come out of those moments in time. And I think it's because, like you said, you know, things happen, like buying behavior shifts and companies change the way that they do business, and that opens up opportunities. And it takes founders and innovators like yourself to you know, want to dive in and roll up their sleeves and sort of build something in an environment like that. So very, very, very cool, and very inspirational. Let's shift gears slightly to the co-founder relationship. I'm really interested in this topic. When you're thinking about co-founders, or, you know, when you think about each other as co-founders, what are some of the most important traits that you look for in a co-founder, or what are important traits in a co-founder relationship? Because, you know, this relationship more than anything, I think is what leads to the success of a startup. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You can get started.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just gonna say, I mean, starting a company with someone, it's like a marriage, right? Like, I think the best way to look at it is someone that you can spend every day with, and I mean, literally spending every day either talking to on a phone or in person, and being able to have a productive conversations about things, right? There might be disagreements, and sometimes there might be agreements, but I also believe like both sides should be complementary to one another. I think if both co-founders agreed on everything, then one of them is not needed, and vice versa. I think the skill set matchup is really important, because in the beginning you have to divide and conquer, right? It's like it's only us. Like when we started the company, it was just Nafis and I. And that stage, it's like we have to do everything, whether it's like sales, product, marketing, like fundraising. Like it's just two versus everything else, right? And now we're fortunate enough to have a great team of people to help us establish that, but a lot of it still comes down to us, right? It's like overall, like how are we setting the roadmap and everything?
Yeah.
And I personally think like, I mean, just being able to have that relationship from working at Nafis for like 5-6 years previously before like Lucky and working at other ideas really helped us just understand like how we work together. Like there's like pros and cons to both of us and our work styles. So now I think we've gone to a very good place where we know each other and how we each work. So we're in a good position. We're like, oh, okay, cool. We know when things will get done. We know how people will perform. So it's been pretty productive since we've had that extra time, rather than this being our first company. Since this is more of like our second or third that actually is succeeding. We've been able to go through the roller coaster before.
Yeah. And I'll add some stuff to that too, like because obviously not everyone is going to have the benefit of that experience, right? Have someone they've known for 5 years before they're the company they're really investing and going all into. So I think the biggest takeaways, you know, first of all, from that 5-6 years or whatever that we knew each other before Lucky, and we kind of had that ability to coordinate everything we're doing around, you know, what we're doing here with Lucky is, you know, we've had the experience of going through hard times, right? Going through gritty moments, hustle moments, and kind of having to look at each other, you know, and early in our lives, you know, we might have been friends or more strangers than anything, right? Like we meet and we start building these things together, but it's not like now where I've known Sneh for, you know, most of my adult life now. At that time, you know, you kind of have to build trust, right? So building trust with someone and understanding that as long as you guys are shared in the journey and focus on the journey together of going through those hard things and being willing to do that together. And I think a big factor that is keeping your ego in check, right? I think we're co-founders, right? It's not like co-founders were two people that are ambitious, have, you know, skills that we could utilize in a lot of different ways. And so it's easy for egos to flare in environments like that. And I think me and Say have been really conscious of investing like the energy that someone will put around the ego. We just both invest in the company, right? Like that's what we have the ego around, success of the company. And we both share in that and we can align in that and not fight around that ever. And, you know, because of that, we can keep our egos in check. And that goes to, you know, doing hard things together and supporting each other, but it also goes towards keeping it real with each other, right? It's about saying, hey, we both, especially when it's just me and him in the company early on, right? We've had moments where we each have to look at each other and say, I need you to do more of this, or I need your help here. And that can be a conversation that's tainted with ego. And that's a really quick way to not succeed in a co-founder relationship. And then along with like what's the thing with like having that complementary skill set, so important, but that's maybe the obvious part of it, right? Of like, hey, you know, if I'm good at sales, I need to go find someone technical. If I'm someone technical, I need to find someone that's a good communicator, whatever that is. I think that the real magic of it though, because there's a lot of people that'll make that matchup and it doesn't work. I think that there needs to be this kind of shared process between co-founders of like support and accountability, right? Like maybe in our company, right? Like I might be more focused on the product side and Sneh might be focused on like partnerships, you know, in a given week. That might be like what we implicitly know that we're each going to go off and take care of and push forward. And we don't need to necessarily, you know, feel like that's our responsibility. It's your responsibility. But there's also this process of like support and accountability, right? If I know that if I'm working on something on the product side, and I know I can ask Sneh for help there, right? I know I can find support in him as my co-founder because we're both mutually invested into the end outcome. And I also know that we have enough visibility into what each other's goals are and what we're working on, that there's a shared accountability where he knows I'm going to accomplish what what's on my plate. I know that he's going to accomplish what's on his plate. And in some ways, it's not even on each other's plate. It's kind of on it's on the shared plate of the company. And we're going to support each other in the growth of that. So I think that's one of the real kind of secret sauce of a good co-founding relationship is you have to be someone or you have to be two people or more that's comfortable with blurred lines and responsibilities. And that can be hard for people that if you're not able to adapt to that, maybe it can be hard to know who's accountable for what and how can I help, right? And you need to figure that process out really intuitively early on. And I think that's like a fundamental momentum driver in a company where Sneh and I can get off a conversation and we don't need to micromanage each other. We know who's supposed to get what done, and it gets done. And we know if there's too much on one person's plate, we can come in and help someone else out. Just as long as it's for the, positive outcome for the company, we'll kind of do whatever it takes.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And you touched on a couple of things in terms of, complementary skill sets and dividing and conquering. I'm curious, there's also many decisions that you guys need to make together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if one decision that needs to be made is specifically in one of your skill sets, maybe that person's best suited to go ahead and take care of that. But there's decisions about the company as a whole, the culture, and various things. How have you guys approached that? How do you, approach the process of coming together, making a decision, and maybe it's a decision that one of you is more in favor of, but you got to push forward with. I'm curious on your mindset around that.
Yeah, I think that.
Go ahead. You go for it. I'll take it off.
I was just going to say, I think it takes, you have to kind of find a rational sort of mode of communication with your co-founder, right? Because ultimately, like, I don't think that there's ever been a singular decision that's been a deal breaker in our relationship, right? Or one of us have had to have like mind-numbing concessions towards us moving forward in. I do think it's a balance of communication and just rationality, right? Like if we can justify a case around something and communicate it to each other, I find that we can come to an agreement, even if one of us had a different opinion entering the conversation. And I think that's just kind of, I don't want to say communication 101 because it is a hard thing. And I do think people suffer through their lives around this, but it's maybe a fundamental communication skill, just rationality and being able to kind of like position and proposition your point properly. That people need to have if they're going to have this sort of relationship with someone where we both have such implications around each decision, right? Like both of our opinions and the consequences of it is huge to both of us equally.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I would have said. I mean, the only thing I would add to that is, I agree. I think like one thing that Nafis mentioned before is like, it's that shared goal, right? It's like at the end of the day, like we want Lucky to be successful. So whatever decision we're either making or one of us is pushing for, it's like for that same goal that we both want. It's like if neither of us are going to make a decision that's going to be detrimental to the company, it's just not going to happen. Also, any decision we ever have to make, and let's say we're having opinions or different opinions about it, we always come to it with like data, right? It's like, this is why I think this decision should be made this way. Or this is why I think we should go this route. And as long as like there's logic behind it and like the other person understands, like we pretty much are good to go, honestly. And then we move forward with it. So
yeah. And I think a huge part of this, again, is just checking your ego out the door. The second you decide to even just like form the LLC around a company, much less enter the conversation. Because if me and Sneh are talking about something and it's boiling up and there's two pathways that might have, it's unclear. That's it's easy when it's analog, where you can kind of come to understanding that there's a good decision for the company and a bad decision. But when there's a complicated decision, I mean, we're comfortable enough to not only check our egos and say, hey, we don't necessarily know the right decision, and then maybe even bring in advisors that we trust to get their opinion and simmer on that. So I think we're very good at coordinating decisions together as long as we go through our process, which could be at some point saying, we don't know the answer and we need to think about it longer. We need to bring more people in. Then they're all things that I think that, if you don't check your ego, you might jump towards a decision just based off either your gut or what's convenient, which I think is really unhealthy in a business.
Yeah. And honestly, being like first time founders, I mean, there's a lot of decisions that we both come to like not knowing the right answer, right? Because like we haven't been in this position before. So like at that time, it is something about like, hey, what's just the most logical path? Or like, hey, we talk to an entrepreneur, a friend of ours, maybe further down the line, or an investor, right? Like, hey, what do you think we should do? And then we usually get their input in as well.
Awesome. Well, you already shared so many great lessons. We have a ton of people that listen to this podcast that are first-time founders. They're just getting started. And now that you guys are, a couple of years in, you're in a place where a lot of these founders want to be. I guess one last question I have for you is, if there was one insight or one piece of advice that you would share with those at the beginning of their journey, what would it be?
Can we give two since there's two of us?
Yeah, let's give one each.
Okay. The first one that comes to mind for me is, if you have that entrepreneurial spirit and you're willing to execute around things, then that's it's a gift, right? And you should keep investing that. But the tough thing that's not necessarily inherent with that is being willing to take big leaps, right? And I think one thing that we've learned in our journey is, and we get better at every day, and every big success we have as a result of this is me and Sneh coming together at one point and saying, that outcome we're talking about would be ideal. It'd be really hard to get, whatever that really means. I mean, that's just like a saying, right? At the end of the day, let's go for it anyways. So taking big leaps and whatever the big goal is, sure, maybe break it down into bite-sized pieces, but never forget the big goal. I think that there's a lot of things that we've done in this business that there's a version of me years ago that would have thought that would be really hard. And there's a version of me now after doing it that thinks, well, I could go do that 100 times over and over again if I had to. So I continue to make big leaps and continue to go for the big thing. And I think that will, if you really want to create a business like this, that'll give you the result that you're trying to get.
Yeah, no, that's a great one. I think for me, one of the ones that come to my mind is just start. It's like, I think a lot of people wait too long to do certain things. And the earlier you do it, the better it is. Honestly, even for us, and I think probably most successful companies out there, what they started off doing is not what they ended up becoming as they were successful. So like starting is like one of the most hardest things that people are afraid to do, that I've seen at least, that a lot of other friends that want to be entrepreneurs weren't able to do it just because they were afraid to do it. I think just taking that leap, just like going for it and like being okay with failure. I think, but the thing is, like, learn from each failure so you don't make the same mistake twice. I think failing is a good thing. If anything, like that's exactly how we look at our company with whether it's product, whether it's sales. Like, hey, like if you're not going to reach out to someone or ask, like you will never know. So there's no harm in like trying and doing it at the beginning. So I would say just like go out there and do it and then see what comes back and then just change the approach if it doesn't work the first time, but eventually it will. So
no, seriously, you got to go launch something. I mean, it's such an important advice what he's talking about, because so many people, they'll sit there and build something in stealth. And we know people like this, they'll build something in stealth for years, trying to get to a perfect something. And first of all, no matter what, the first thing you ship will never be great. So just get it out there. I mean, I've seen in that same amount of time, someone's building in stealth for 2 years. I've seen people ship something mediocre, improve upon it, and sell a company, right? And so it really is something, you just got to get something out there. You got to be willing to do that. And that's such a trait of a true entrepreneur. And when we told you about our story, us getting that product off the ground and me driving around, dropping stuff off, like obviously that's something that we built in like a month real quick, and we just got it live, and we did something unscalable just so we had something to have, and if we would have never done that, we probably wouldn't have had this company as we did today.
This has been amazing, guys. I really appreciate the time and all the great insight and stories. If folks want to follow you along in your journey, both Lucky and you individually, where's the best place to follow you guys?
Yeah, I think us up on Twitter and LinkedIn.
Yeah, I think Twitter and LinkedIn would be great. I mean, we're at luckylabs.hq on Twitter, and then if you type in Lucky, you'll find us on LinkedIn as well. And then personally, Twitter is probably the best for both of us. I'm at Sneh Parmar, so first and last name with an extra R at the end, and then Nafis is at Nafis with a V, I believe, right?
That's my Instagram actually now. It's at Azad Nafis. So my last name and then my first name.
Great. Well, thanks again, guys. And we'll have to have you back on the podcast in a couple of months and catch up on how this journey is going.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it was a great time. Thanks, Justin. It's great as always to catch up with you.
See you, Justin. Thanks for having us.